The kitchen was quiet, the kind of quiet that made every sound feel sharp and too loud. Then the bill hit the table. $15,000, printed in bold black numbers that seemed to stare right at Daniel. It landed with a slap that echoed in the room, and for a moment he just stared at it. He didn't move, didn't speak. His mind was trying to process what had just happened, but it refused to make sense. Claire, his sister, stood across from him, arms crossed, chin lifted like she was announcing the obvious. Her eyes were sharp, cold, but also filled with something he didn't recognize at first. Entitlement. Pay it, she said, as if those two words were enough to erase every boundary, every history between them. Daniel felt a shock pass through him. Pay it? After everything he had done for her. He had supported her when she had no money, watched her son while she worked, lent her money without expecting repayment. He had always been the one to give, never to demand. The words burned. They weren't just a demand. They were an accusation. Claire's voice was steady, unyielding. You're the successful one. You have the stable job. Ethan deserves a future. And you can help. So help. She was presenting it like a logical argument, but Daniel felt the venom underneath. This wasn't about Ethan. It was never about Ethan. Memories flashed in Daniel's mind. Memories of subtle digs, of comparisons and jealous words. Family dinners where she mocked his struggles, calling him lucky while pretending she knew better. Arguments that never ended but always left him apologizing. All those moments built into this one act of betrayal. It hit him like a wave. She didn't want help. She wanted control. She wanted to remind him that no matter what he did, he could be pressured, manipulated, made to feel guilty for the good he had done. Daniel picked up the bill. The paper felt heavier than it should. $15,000 stared back at him. Impossible, but not because of the sum. It was impossible because it symbolized everything he had been suppressing. The frustration, the pain, the years of putting others first while he was expected to vanish into the background. Anger stirred in his chest. Not the wild, burning anger of violence, but the quiet, precise anger of someone realizing they had been played for far too long. Leaned closer, voice sharper. If you walk away from this, don't bother calling again. Those words cut deeper than the bill itself. They weren't just a threat. They were a declaration. She expected him to fold, to surrender as he always had. She expected him to accept guilt as payment for generosity. But Daniel didn't move. Instead, something inside him changed. He remembered the nights he stayed up worrying about his sister and her son, giving more than he could afford, bending to her needs because he believed family came first. Now he realized she never respected that. She never saw him as a person with limits. She saw him as a source, a wallet, a helper, a caretaker. This realization brought a clarity that was both shocking and freeing. Daniel folded the bill carefully, setting it back on the table. He didn't say anything more. Instead, he let the silence stretch, long and heavy, pressing down on both of them. He whispered, almost to himself, "This isn't about Ethan, is it?" Claire didn't answer, and in that moment, Daniel understood more than words could say. The betrayal wasn't the bill. The betrayal was the assumption, the expectation, the years of subtle manipulation coming to a head in this single act. He felt the anger and pain mix with something unfamiliar, resolve. He could feel the storm building inside him, a tension that had been quiet for too long. For the first time, he didn't try to suppress it. For the first time, he didn't try to rationalize or excuse. He felt it fully. The sting of betrayal, the weight of his sister's audacity, the injustice of being expected to pay not just money but obedience. Without a word, Daniel turned and walked toward the door. Claire's eyes followed him, expecting him to stop, to argue, to beg. But he didn't. He didn't need to. He didn't need her approval or validation anymore. The betrayal had lit something in him. Not just anger, but awareness. Awareness of how he had been treated. Awareness of what he had tolerated. And awareness of what he refused to tolerate now. Outside, the air was cool, a sharp contrast to the heated tension he left behind. As he walked down the street, the feeling of betrayal followed him, but now it carried a new energy, the beginning of a plan, a focus, a desire not for destruction but for balance. He didn't want to hurt Claire or Ethan. He wanted control over his own life, the right to say no, the freedom to protect himself from further manipulation. Every step took him further from the kitchen, but closer to an idea that had been forming. Quietly in the back of his mind, revenge didn't have to be cruel. It didn't have to be loud. It could be clean, precise, and final. It could be about reclaiming what was his: dignity, respect, and boundaries he had let slip for too long. Daniel's hands clenched into fists at his sides. But his mind was clear. He didn't hate Claire. Not yet. He hated the pattern, the manipulation, the expectation that he was nothing more than a means to her ends. And for the first time, he realized that confronting this betrayal wouldn't just be about her. It would be about him, about standing up for himself in a way he never had before. The betrayal had struck hard, but it had awakened him. He wasn't just a victim of circumstance or family dynamics. He was a person with power, with choices, with a voice that had been quiet for too long. And now, finally, he was ready to use it. Walking down the street, Daniel didn't look back. He didn't need to. The kitchen, the bill, Claire's sharp gaze, all of it was behind him. Ahead lay a decision that would define him, a path that could either consume him with anger or free him with clarity. And for the first time in years, he felt the weight of possibility, the thrilling, terrifying weight of a future he could shape on his own terms. Days passed after the confrontation, but Daniel's mind never rested. Every corner of his apartment seemed to echo Claire's voice. Every shadow whispered the memory of her demand. The bill wasn't just a piece of paper anymore. It was a symbol of everything he had endured. The constant expectation to sacrifice. The manipulation that had been subtle for years, but now screamed in his face. He tried to focus on work, but the numbers on his spreadsheets blurred. His fingers hovered over the keyboard without typing. The rage inside him simmered, controlled yet relentless, demanding attention. He walked the city streets aimlessly, observing families, couples, people laughing without a care. He envied their simplicity, yet he also noticed the power of choice. How people could decide their own boundaries, defend their own dignity, and walk away from demands they didn't owe. That thought made his chest tighten. He realized he had never truly defended himself. He had always been the peacemaker, the silent supporter, the one who smiled and said yes while swallowing the rising resentment inside. At night, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Ethan's face appeared in his mind. The boy wasn't part of this mess. He hadn't asked to be used as leverage in a game of control. Daniel loved him, cared for him, wanted to help him succeed, but he refused to let that love be exploited. That line had to be drawn. He couldn't allow Claire to weaponize family, to force guilt upon him, to push him into submission. But how could he act without causing harm to Ethan? That question gnawed at him, twisting into a knot of moral dilemma. Daniel began reflecting on every moment Claire had manipulated him, not just this one. The small loans he never expected back, the favors done in secret, the times he had bent over backward while she walked over him with ease. Each memory sharpened the clarity he was forming. He had been used, and now he had a choice. He could continue to be a doormat, letting family obligations strip him of autonomy, or he could fight back. But revenge didn't have to mean cruelty. It could mean power, presence, and control over his own life. He started making lists, writing down scenarios, calculating consequences. He planned each step in his mind, imagining confrontations, imagining Claire's smug expression when he finally refused. But alongside the anger, another feeling persisted: fear. Fear that his actions might backfire. Fear that he might hurt Ethan unintentionally. Fear that the very family he had protected would fracture because he chose to defend himself. That fear sharpened his focus. He realized the true nature of revenge wasn't about hurting the other person. It was about restoring equilibrium. Every morning, he woke with tension buzzing in his chest. Every evening he sat at the edge of his bed, staring at the folded bill on his desk. The paper represented more than money. It represented a battle, a moral test. He imagined Claire's smug tone, the expectation in her voice that he would comply without question. That expectation was unbearable. Daniel could no longer ignore the truth. He had to stand firm. And yet, standing firm required careful planning. One wrong move could escalate into confrontation, chaos, and unnecessary pain. Daniel began observing Claire from a distance. Not in a creepy way, but he analyzed her behavior, her patterns, the way she communicated. He realized she believed she was entitled to manipulate him because she thought love and family duty demanded it. She didn't see him as a person with boundaries. She saw him as a tool. That realization was chilling, but it also gave him a plan. If she thrived on control, he could reclaim it without anger. He didn't need to yell, argue, or shame her. He simply needed to demonstrate he would no longer be manipulated. He visualized the confrontation over and over. He imagined handing back the bill, his voice calm but resolute. "I won't do this." He imagined the shock in her eyes, the disbelief, the subtle panic when she realized she no longer held power over him. It was not vindictive. It was firm. It was reclaiming his life, piece by piece, from someone who had long taken more than they deserved. But even as he planned, the emotional toll weighed heavily. He was exhausted by the constant mental replay, by the swirling thoughts of justice, fairness, and morality. He wrestled with himself at every turn. Was this truly revenge, or was it self-preservation disguised as vengeance? Could he carry out his plan without succumbing to bitterness, without letting anger define his identity? These questions kept him awake at night, each one sharper than the last, each one demanding honesty he wasn't used to giving himself. He turned to writing as a coping mechanism, pouring thoughts into a journal, breaking down each memory of betrayal into its essence. With each entry, the weight of his emotions lessened slightly. He wrote about the hurt, the frustration, the expectation, and the manipulation. Writing clarified his intentions. He wasn't acting out of cruelty. He was acting to reclaim his life, to show that generosity did not equate to weakness, that love did not equal compliance. In quiet moments, Daniel also confronted another truth. Claire's actions were rooted in her own fears, her own insecurities, her own life struggles. She genuinely believed she was entitled to his help because she had raised a child alone. She believed the world was against her. This understanding did not excuse her, but it complicated his feelings. Revenge suddenly wasn't just black and white. It was grey, shaded with empathy, with recognition that hurting her might also hurt. The innocent herself and Ethan. He imagined alternative paths. Giving in and paying the bill would preserve temporary peace but destroy his self-respect. Walking away without confrontation might protect him from conflict but leave him feeling powerless. Carefully refusing could hurt Claire emotionally, but ultimately draw boundaries that were necessary. The more he weighed options, the more he realized that the real act of power wasn't money, wasn't punishment, but choice. The ability to say no. The ability to reclaim himself. Daniel also started noticing patterns in himself. He realized he had spent decades prioritizing others, at the expense of his own well-being. Generosity had become expectation. Sacrifice had become default. Anger and resentment had been quietly brewing, unnoticed, suppressed. This awareness became fuel. He no longer wanted to be passive. He wanted control. He wanted dignity. And he wanted to ensure that no one, not even family, could weaponize his compassion again. As days turned into a week, the planning became second nature. Daniel rehearsed what he would say. He practiced calm, deliberate statements that communicated boundaries without aggression. He visualized Claire's potential reactions and his responses. Each mental rehearsal strengthened his resolve. Each scenario reduced his anxiety and clarified his goal. The goal wasn't destruction. It wasn't drama. It was assertion. It was reclaiming power without surrendering morality. Late one evening, sitting by the window, Daniel felt a strange mix of exhaustion and focus. The conflict inside him had sharpened into clarity. He no longer felt the paralyzing weight of betrayal. Instead, he felt purpose. He understood that the act of revenge would be subtle, precise, and effective. It would not humiliate Claire. It would not harm Ethan. It would simply assert one fact. Daniel would no longer be used. The planning, the moral wrestling, the sleepless nights, they all led to this point. He felt the tension of a tightrope walk. One misstep could create chaos, one lapse could invite unnecessary pain. But he was ready. The battle wasn't with Claire. The battle was with the years of manipulation, with the invisible chains of guilt and obligation that had held him captive. The revenge was a message, not an attack. It was a statement. Boundaries matter. Respect matters. Self-worth matters. By the end of the week, Daniel's mind was ready. The emotional groundwork was laid. He knew he would act, and he knew the timing would be perfect. He would reclaim his dignity, confront the manipulation, and maintain his morality. The plan was set. The conflict had been navigated. And now, the moment of truth, the confrontation loomed. Daniel felt a strange mixture of fear, anticipation, and exhilaration. He was about to face Claire, not as the passive brother who had been pushed and pulled for years, but as a man who understood the power of choice, the strength of boundaries, and the true meaning of controlled revenge. The sky was grey when Daniel pulled up outside Claire's house. Rain threatened but hadn't yet fallen, leaving the air heavy and tense. He gripped the folded $15,000 bill in his pocket, feeling its weight both physically and emotionally. This wasn't just a piece of paper anymore. It was the symbol of everything that had been taken from him. His patience, his generosity, his dignity. He walked up to the front door, each step steady, deliberate, controlled. No hesitation. No second guessing. Claire opened the door before he could knock. Her eyes widened slightly at the sight of him standing there so calm, so composed. She tilted her head, as if expecting him to break, to stumble, to beg like she thought he would. "I knew you'd come around," she said with that familiar tone of certainty, as if she already owned this moment. Daniel didn't speak. He stepped inside, careful not to slam the door. careful not to give her any emotional weapon. His hand went into his pocket, and he pulled out the folded bill. He placed it gently on the table between them, like setting down a challenge instead of a demand. "I'm not paying it," he said. The words were quiet, but the calm authority behind them made them thunderous in the room. Claire's brow furrowed. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice sharp but tinged with disbelief. She had expected compliance, not defiance. She had expected guilt, not this quiet strength. Daniel leaned back slightly, meeting her gaze. There was no anger in his eyes, only resolution. "I've helped you for years. I've supported Ethan. I've given without expectation. But this is not help. This is control. And I will not be controlled." Claire's face tightened. Her voice rose, a mix of frustration and panic. "I did everything alone. You don't understand the pressure I've been under." Daniel's voice remained calm, precise. "I understand more than you think. I understand how hard it is to raise a child. I understand responsibility. But I also understand manipulation. I understand when love is used as a weapon. And I will not let it be used on me again." Her lips parted, words caught in her throat. Daniel could see it. The shock, the uncertainty, the sudden recognition that she no longer held the power she had always believed she did. He didn't gloat. He didn't mock. He simply held his ground. That was enough. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument could have been. Daniel continued. "Ethan is important to me, always. I care about him, and I will support him. But I will not support a system where my kindness becomes a tool to guilt me into obedience. That ends today." Claire opened her mouth again, but the words faltered. She wanted to fight, to twist, to argue. But she saw, for the first time, that her brother was not the man she thought she could bend. Daniel's hand rested lightly on the edge of the table. He could have raised his voice, made a scene, stormed out, or humiliated her. He chose none of those. His power wasn't in drama. His power was in calm clarity, in boundaries drawn with precision and respect for morality. Claire could react however she wanted. Daniel knew that he had already won in the only way that mattered. He had reclaimed himself. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. Claire's posture softened ever so slightly. She still looked frustrated, but the sharpness in her eyes had dulled. The certainty she once had, that he would always comply, was gone. She whispered finally, "You're really walking away?" Daniel shook his head slowly. "No, I'm not walking away from Ethan. I'm walking away from being used. I'm choosing myself. That's the difference." The distinction hit Claire hard. She realized, suddenly, that her power over him had never been absolute. She had taken advantage of his patience, his generosity, his love, but she could not take his agency. Not anymore. As he turned toward the door, Daniel felt a strange mix of relief and weight. Relief that he had finally confronted the manipulation. Directly weight, because family ties were complex and fragile. But he also felt something new. Freedom. The kind of freedom that comes not from anger or revenge, but from self-respect, from clarity, from knowing that you no longer have to be anyone's pawn. Outside, the air was crisp, almost cleansing. Rain had begun to fall lightly, tapping on the roof and sidewalk, washing the tension from the streets. Daniel walked down the driveway slowly, feeling each step solid and deliberate. He wasn't running from Claire or the situation. He was moving toward a life where he set the rules, where he decided what he owed, and to whom. Over the next few days, communication with Claire changed. She didn't call, she didn't text, but that was fine. Ethan reached out with a simple message. "I miss you. Can we talk? Daniel responded warmly, setting a time to meet. The bond with the boy remained untouched. He realized that his decision had not fractured the things that mattered. It had only removed the toxicity, the manipulation, the sense that he had to obey to be loved. Daniel reflected on the confrontation repeatedly. He could have reacted with anger, humiliation, or dramatic revenge. He could have thrown back insults, embarrassed Claire, or used the same manipulation tactics she had used on him. But he didn't. The real victory wasn't making her feel small. The real victory was proving to himself that he could take a stand without compromising his integrity, that he could assert boundaries without cruelty, that he could reclaim power without creating chaos. He thought about the concept of revenge, how people imagine it as satisfaction, as payback, as closure. But he realized the truth. Revenge might satisfy in the moment, but it rarely leaves the soul unscathed. What he had done was more difficult, harder than yelling, harder than shaming, harder than paying attention to fleeting satisfaction. He had acted thoughtfully, morally, and strategically. And that was a kind of revenge more lasting than any impulsive act. In the quiet evenings that followed, Daniel often sat on his balcony, watching the sunset streak across the city. He thought about Claire, about the past, and about the future. The storm inside him had quieted, replaced by calm vigilance. He felt lighter, not reckless or triumphant, but balanced. The tension of betrayal had been resolved not through destruction but through choice. Not through punishment but through asserting boundaries. Not through anger but through clarity. Daniel understood something essential. The world will always demand, always manipulate, always test patience. People will always push limits, and family can be just as complicated as strangers. But the difference is agency. The ability to choose how to respond. That choice, he realized, was more powerful than any act of revenge. It healed, it clarified, it restored dignity. Looking back, he knew the journey hadn't been easy. It had demanded reflection, courage, and emotional endurance. He had wrestled with guilt, fear, love, and anger. But in the end, he discovered that the true measure of strength isn't in retaliation. It's in knowing your worth, protecting your boundaries, and acting decisively without compromising who you are. The storm clouds above cleared slightly, revealing a faint glow on the horizon. Daniel took a deep breath. For the first time in a long while, he felt fully present, fully in control. The confrontation with Claire had ended. The moral struggle had concluded, and he was left with something rare and precious. Freedom grounded in integrity. As night fell, Daniel's phone buzzed. A simple text from Ethan. "Thanks for being there." For me? Daniel smiled. That was the payoff he had sought all along. Not satisfaction from punishing Claire, not triumph in conflict, but the preservation of what mattered most. Family, love, and personal dignity, all intact, all respected, all carefully defended. And in that moment he understood the ultimate lesson. Revenge might bring temporary satisfaction, but true power comes from boundaries, respect, and the courage to choose yourself first. In standing firm, he hadn't just faced Claire. He had faced himself, his fears, his past, and come out stronger, wiser and free.